Hey everyone, this is Mohsen Farzizadeh. We are Refugees for Future and we deal with climate changes, climate crisis and climate colonialism around the world. And now we are trying to connect climate activists all around the world. And today we have our first online workshop with Eva Moza from Zimbabwe. Eva, very welcome to the meeting. Can you give introduction of yourself?
My name is Ivo Muhoza, and I'm originally from Burundi, and I'm staying here in Zimbabwe as a refugee. I'm a renewable energy engineer at Assorted Energies International, which is a refugee youth-led initiative, which I founded by myself. And we got the privilege of receiving funding from the Global Refugee Youth Network. And over the past from March this year, we were implementing a renewable energy project in Tonga refugee camp. Added to that, I'm also a climate and a refugee education advocate. And I've had the privileges of participating at a number of conferences, such as COP26 summit, where I spoke in a side event, which was a collaboration between UNHCR and other partners. I also participated at the Rewired Summit, which happened last year in November in Dubai on refugee education, education in essence. I'm also a member of the Refugee Education Council under World Vision Canada, which is an initiative started in collaboration with the Canadian International Education Working Group. And its duty is to advise the government of Canada on the Together for Learning campaign. In terms of studies, I completed my undergraduate here in Zimbabwe, where I was studying at University of Technology. And beginning this September, I'll be starting my master's in energy and nuclear engineering in Italy.
Really nice. And you are quite doing a lot. That's really nice. And even in Middle East and African countries, unfortunately, climate changes is not a topic. You know, I'm from Iran, and in Iran, it was never a topic. And I want to know, we want to know, how did you get interested in climate change?
All right, so it all comes back in my university studies. I was carrying out fuels and energy engineering, and during the course of my studies, I got the privileges of doing an internship at a renewable energy company. And during that experience, I got exposed to renewable energy technologies, such as talk of solar power. We talk of solar geysers. And this sparked my interest when it comes to renewable energy, because we're looking at technologies that are more environmentally friendly, which do not pollute the atmosphere. And also getting to know about the impact that climate change itself it's having upon the world. It was really something that sparked my interest, and I wanted to contribute something towards how to make the world more sustainable, more cleaner. So this is something that sparked my interest, and when I got in my final year, I then began an initiative. But knowing that I wasn't able to carry out this initiative on my own, I approached a number of colleagues, and this is how an initiative called Assorted Energies International started. And when I completed, I got the privileges of getting funding from the Global Refugee Youth Network, which gave us funding to carry out our first significant project in Tongokara refugee camp. And beginning March 2022, we're implementing a renewable energy project where we carried out a number of activities. The first one had to do with solar system installations, where we installed solar systems to other refugee-led initiatives in the camp. And we went on to donate solar lights to vulnerable people in the community. And afterwards, we also did some capacity building where we trained youth in the camp, including women and girls, on different topics from climate change, renewable energy technologies, how to design a solar systems, how to install it. And we did a number of campaigns in the camp where we went about raising awareness on clean energy technologies, essentially how to mitigate climate change through the uptake of clean energy technologies. So what really sparked my interest and our organization, we identified three things. The first one was to do with electricity shortage that is being faced in Zimbabwe. We have in the past time where load shedding was really a serious issue, and we experience it a lot even now, but I think back then, I think it was more serious, and electricity shortage is always a challenge. So we wanted to bring about a solution to that. And the other thing was the environmental impacts imposed by power generation, as well as other human-induced activities. Human-induced emissions from various activities we see here in Zimbabwe. A lot of people are dependent on agriculture as a source of livelihoods, but during the past 2 decades, we see people shifting from horticulture, going on to keep livestock in order to have food as well as generate revenue. So we have many people taking care of chickens, pigs. We also see some of them, they are keeping cattle, and so they release fetal matter and cow dung. So these all contributes to emissions of greenhouse gases such as methane. And also on the side of power generation, we see a number of power plants making use of coal, and the implication of using coal is that it releases greenhouse gases. So this is really something that sparked us. And also, lastly, we wanted to contribute towards sustainable development of refugees, because if we look at the hardship within the nation, not only in Zimbabwe, but mostly we see that the refugee community is mostly affected. So we wanted to intervene and impact youth, women with the knowledge and skills for them to become self-reliant. And we wanted to create more opportunities for refugees. So this is what I would say.
Nice, and thank you. It was about education, and you told a little about education, and how is it education about climate changes in African countries? I'm asking because in Middle East, in many countries in Middle East, it's not still a topic. We don't have that enough education, and many people don't even know about consequences of climate change and how horrible it can be. The one we are experiencing, unfortunately, in Pakistan now, millions of people have been displaced. How is climate education in Zimbabwe and other countries in Africa?
All right. So when you talk of climate education, I think, yeah, you mentioned about Middle East. We also see a number of devastation that the impacts of climate change is leaving upon human lives, and it has really become a global crisis. But I still think that the education on climate is something that is still lacking, and we are facing the similar challenge right here in the global south in Africa. So if we look, for example, here in Zimbabwe, we see there's problems too with waste management itself. We see you walk around, you see a lot of waste lying around. And you can actually notice that people haven't been sensitized, people haven't gained the knowledge on climate change, because whenever someone just eats, it just throws things around. They've not been, they haven't gripes in them the clean practices that foster, you know, a cleaner environment. So it's really something that is lacking. And we have so many refugee youth who have really realized it, and they have gone on to start their own initiatives in order to educate youth within Tongogara refugee camp. The first one is Assorted Energies International, which is my organization. We identified this as a lake, and so we implemented this project. And during the time, we have been educating people on climate change. We also have another initiative called Refugee Child's Coalition for Climate Change, RCCA, which is a refugee-led project also that facilitates a child youth participation approach to climate environmental action here in Tongogara refugee camp in Zimbabwe. And they also receive funding as well from the Global Refugee Youth Network. And during that time, they've been raising awareness about climate change and the environmental degradation by engaging young people in climate advocacy, tree planting, and environmental care through cleanup campaigns. So we have different initiatives. We also have the Transformation Innovation Hub in Tongogara Refugee Camp as well. And by identifying this, the waste management problems that were being faced within the camp, they gathered some plastic bottles, and these plastic bottles which were lying around, you know, as waste, they actually built a house out of those plastic bottles. And so this is really something that this refugee youth, they've identified as a lack of climate education here in Zimbabwe. So the other thing as well that limits climate education, we also see that there's a belief, a cultural belief, I would say, when it comes to the climate education. We see people, they resort to their traditional beliefs that maybe there is a god somewhere, you know, who causes water to rain, things like that. And so I think this is something that makes people to be ignorant about the fact that we ought to, you know, it all comes from the activities that we carry out. And so these are some of the limiting factors. But I think, you know, climate education is really something that we ought to really act, because looking at the devastating the results that it's causing, it's really huge, resulting in cyclones. And recently, if we look at the news, the climate, the weather report, it was actually showing that Zimbabwe it's at a position where we are likely to experience some form of cyclones as well in the next coming days or months. So it's really something that everyone should be sensitized. Everyone should be aware of climate, and should start, you know, practicing and practicing in order to foster a climate resilient society. And I think this is something that we all can work towards, from being an individual to large corporations. And I think more advocacy should be placed into it, so that the international community, when you talk of non-governmental organizations, private sectors, financial institutions, should be aware of climate change and the impacts that is having upon our lives, and really be in a position to help those that are the poor communities, because we see that they are the ones who are mostly affected, and more investments, more projects should be done to support them and to intervene in various ways, from the digitalization of the education system, so that whenever an occurrence of like that or a cyclone occurs, we see that the education system is not disturbed. And also working on building on, livelihoods of the people, refugee livelihoods, to constructing infrastructures that are more climate resilient, so that we are more prepared of the future. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, really nice. Thank you. And, and most affected countries, Eva, it is mostly not a topic. Climate change is not a topic, is not that important. I'm in the Middle East and most African countries, but still there are groups who are really active, but the government is not caring of this topic at all, at least in Iran. There is in west of Iran, there is a salt lake. It used to be the 6th biggest salt lake in the world, but since years ago it started to dry out, and government did nothing to control this crisis. And now it is totally dried out. It's a catastrophe, it is a salt lake. Water is gone now. There is 6 layers of salt on the ground. And just a few months ago, there were a windstorm, and it started to carry the salt to the neighborhood cities that are based on agriculture. As you said about Zimbabwe, people are doing like that. And it destroyed, and it is going to destroy. It's not that terrible now, so many people don't know about it. And this is why education is really important, to know about the consequences. Soon the salt will be carried to neighborhood cities first, and then to the countries in neighborhood. Turkey, Iraq, and the whole world will suffer from its consequences, as you know. And there is no, when it is about climate changes no borders. It will affect all of us. Just the thing is happening in Pakistan, it'll affect the whole world. It's not only about Pakistan. It's not about millions of people being displaced. The world will face the consequences. And to go back to the point, governments are not doing anything to control this crisis. How is it with governments in African countries, in Zimbabwe? Do you think they are doing enough, or they can do better? Can you put some words about it?
Yes, so we see, for instance, Zimbabwe, for over the past 2 decades, Zimbabwe has been experiencing a series of droughts, reduced rainfall, which has directly impacted on socioeconomic activities of the countries. Because, as I mentioned earlier, that we have so many people who are into agriculture, because agriculture is the source of livelihoods for the majority of the people. We look at the percentage of people that are employed within the agricultural sector. It's really sustaining a lot of lives. And so we see people shifting from horticulture, going to livelihoods, into livestock rearing. And yet still we see climate change as well, affecting as well the livestock rearing in terms of water scarcity. And so it's really something that is devastating a lot. And if we look at 2019, there is the incident in Tongogara refugee camp, where I'm sure you're all aware of Cyclone Idai, tropical cyclone Idai, which occurred in March 2019. And it affected the region of Manica land, where we look at Maswi, Chimanimani, we talk of Tongogara, where we have Tongogara refugee camp. And during that time of Cyclone Idai, it destroyed a lot of, in Tongogara, it destroyed water systems and also the livelihood, schools. So it was really devastating. And then on record, we see that Zimbabwe has reported that around 270,000 people in Zimbabwe got affected during that time. And it caused extreme damage, which was estimated to about $622 million in order to assist households which were destroyed, the human lives. And also during that time, on record, it says that around 60,000 people were displaced. So we look at human displacement. And so we see the government coming through again and implementing different projects. So based on what I read is that we see that there are particularly two projects that the government implemented in order to cater for people's livelihoods, to restore the lives of the people. And a number of support were given, from rebuilding of community infrastructure and also restoring livelihoods through restoring agricultural crops, livestock production, as well as the health sector itself. So we see the government coming in through, and even in Tongogara refugee camp, there have always been a number of intervention. But I still think that, you know, the government ought to do more as well to cater for the livelihood of the people, you know. And for example, refugees, I think, so if we look at a number of refugee camps, not only in Zimbabwe, even in we talk of the Rohingya refugees, they have gone through a series that they've experienced the impact of climate change. And so the government ought to do something to always be prepared and to intervene in those areas that are most vulnerable. So we have also, the government also created some evacuation camps as well. And during the time of the Cyclone Idai, we see a lot of people who were moved from those affected areas, taken to the evacuation centers. And then the government built some households for them, for those people who were affected. But essentially, I think the government ought to do more to contribute towards the livelihoods of the refugee community, and to really inject funds towards it, and also to promote initiatives that are tackling climate change. See, we talk of Tongogara refugee camp. I mentioned about these different projects that are being implemented in the camp by young refugee boys, girls. But the most thing that they're lacking is financing. So we see them getting finances from organizations that are international organizations, whereas the government itself isn't involved. So we have, like last year, not last year, but this year, we had some journalists interviewing us, myself and my other colleagues who were implementing different projects in the camp concerning the different works that we were doing. So now imagine that next year they come again and they do not see the same momentum, the same development that is being done. It's really something that will make the refugees unreliable. So I think the government ought to do more in terms of injecting funds to support the refugees, and also policies as well should be more convenient for for refugees, and also helping out, the poor communities, and helping them in construction of livelihoods, as well as even job employment, because we see a number of unemployed. You see, unemployment it's a real challenge, looking at the fact that most people are within the agricultural sector, and also the different hardships. So I think more, job employment should also be, there ought to be more opportunities to employ poor people, so that they are also, improve, so that they improve the livelihoods of the poor people, because these are the people who are going to be mostly affected whenever an occurrence occurs, because they are unable to cater for their own livelihoods. If in schools as well, if we look at some of the schools, we talk of informal education. I think this is something that has become a norm. And so just having the government intervening and taking responsible for their own people, so that whenever an occurrence occurs, they are prepared. And yeah, I think that's what I would say.
Yeah, that was quite comprehensive answer. Even next question goes to climate change and climate colonialism in African countries. Can you tell us a bit about how affected is African country by climate change and climate colonialism?
So climate change here in Africa, particularly in Zimbabwe, we see the impacts of climate change. From what I've mentioned earlier, we see that it has really affected agriculture sector itself, and resulting in food insecurity, water scarcity. As a result, we see, for example, in the Matabeleland region of Zimbabwe, we see that it has experienced as well the outbreak of waterborne diseases such as diarrhea due to water scarcity. And if we look again at the national water supply, we see that they depend on the surface water in order to supply water. So climate change, it affects, it reduces the availability of the surface water, directly impacting on the amount of water that is available for people to use. For example, if you look at now here in Zimbabwe, there's a serious challenge. For example, if you look in Harare, there have been a number of reports to do with how water has been a shortage. We see people coming up with the boreholes in order to collect water from the ground, because the city of Zimbabwe cannot supply the water, because there's no water. And sometimes we see this water that is supplied. This is something that I've noticed here in Harare. You see that some of the water, you can actually say that this water that I'm drinking, it is impurities. It's not clean at all. And so this is the impact of climate change, where we look at, for example, artisanal miners. We see them, particularly like here in Zimbabwe, we see them releasing some sediments. These sediments, they go into the river, polluting the water bodies. And so this is some of the ways that Zimbabwe is being affected. And also, if we look at the power generation as well, we see that it's something that has really been affected. If we look at Zimbabwe Power Company, Zimbabwe is made up of 5 power companies, 4 of which are coal-fired, and the other one is an hydroelectric power plant, which is located in Kariba. And we see that for the past 2 decades, it has been experienced a shortage in the power supplied. And we see that the majority of the power is actually being supplied from hydroelectric. And this is owing to the drying season, the drought period which has been experienced, which reduces the amount of water in Lake Kariba, which is the one in charge for generating the power at Kariba. So this in some way has made Zimbabwe not to depend on hydroelectric, but to also depend more on coal-fired power plants. So we see the majority of the power being generated from coal-fired power plants. And as a result, you see coal, the implication of using coal, it releases greenhouse gases, contributing to climate change. At the same time, we look at the international, the international community calling for a ceasing of using power generated from fossil fuels. But how can a country like Zimbabwe, stop producing power from coal-fired power plants? Like Zimbabwe is estimated as an area which received a lot of solar resource. But however, then the transition, I think it's something that is capital intensive. And I think this is something that the Western countries should really support, especially when we see the international community meeting at conferences such as COP27 or any other climate conference. I think they ought to really resolve this issue of supporting, providing funds for the global south. And this is what would take us to climate colonialism, because if we look at climate colonialism, this is defined as when the wealthier countries, they live and operate at the ecological expense of developing countries. So we see a number of Western countries exploiting the resources of the global south for their greening agenda.
Question goes to the climate change and climate colonialism. Eva, can you tell us a bit about how African countries, how Zimbabwe is affected by climate change and climate colonialism?
So climate change has really affected the socioeconomic as well as the political situation here in Zimbabwe. We see that it has really affected the agricultural sector. For the past 2 decades, we see that Zimbabwe has been experiencing a series of droughts, reduced rainfall, which has impacted on agricultural activities. And we see that the agricultural sector, it employs the majority of the people. And so we see farmers moving from horticulture into livestock rearing in order to earn a living, as well as to adapt to the change in the climate. But here still we see that owing to climate change, it has also affected water availability, where we see that in the Matabeleland region, for instance, it has experienced some waterborne diseases such as diarrhea, which has really affected people's health. And also we see that even the water bodies that are polluted, we see that a lot of artisanal miners, during their mining, we see them releasing sediments directly into the river, polluting water bodies. And also we see the level of surface water as well reducing. We see the national water supply being affected, in that it depends on the surface water in order to supply the national water. But then, owing to the droughts, we see a reduction in the available surface water. And also recently, we here in Harare, we have the residents experiencing a really serious problem to do with water itself. We see a lot of residents, starting to dig up boreholes in order to depend on the water, because the national water supply cannot supply water. And also we see that even the water that is being supplied sometimes is no longer conducive of drinking. You see people, they actually have to boil the water. I remember like at our home, we had to boil water and then we let it cool, and then we drink it afterwards, because the water is not conducive. You can actually get sick. Yeah. So these are some of the problems that is being faced directly into itself. See? So it's really something that is, climate change has really affected the livelihoods of the people, and also at the same time affecting the power generation itself. We see that Zimbabwe, the majority of the power is generated from hydroelectric at Kariba, which depends on Lake Kariba. But then over the 2 decades, we see the fluctuations due to droughts, reduced rainfall. We see that the water level is reduced, directly impacting on the power generated. So we see Zimbabwe depending on coal-fired power plants in order to provide for the national electricity supply. And the result of using coal is that it emits greenhouse gases. And also we look at the international community calling upon the elimination of fossil fuel. But how can a country like Zimbabwe or any other African countries be in a position to do that? It's something that is capital intensive. So I think it leaves a huge gap at international conferences such as COP27, the National Climate Change Conference, and other conferences as well, whose agenda is to work on climate change. I think they ought to, convince the Western countries to release funds, to commit themselves to assisting the global South. And this is where we see climate colonialism, and we see that wealthier countries live and they operate at the ecological expense of developing countries. Another definition on climate colonialism, we see that it is the exploitation of resources of the global South by the global North for their green agendas. Okay? We see a lot of projects that has been done by Western countries. Some of them include carbon offsetting, and this has resulted in the occupation of land, actually, and some of it has been claimed to be violating human rights, resulting in land grabbing as well, and violence. So we see a number of afforestation. For example, in Mozambique, there was a certain Norwegian company which was into afforestation project for carbon offsetting. It actually led the leaders, the indigenous leaders, to sign a contract with terms that they do not understand, in the promise that they would build infrastructure, create opportunities, but not knowing that they are actually. So these are some of the things. And also we see in the Western countries also the issue of transitioning to electric cars and smartphones, we see that some of these things, they require minerals such as cobalt, and some of these minerals they are found in there was a Congolese who actually sued some tech companies, including Google, Dell, Tesla, Microsoft, for aiding the death and injury. The plaintiffs say that these companies were aware of child labor in the supply chain. So this is some of the insight in the global south, and we see that Zimbabwe also it's vulnerable. It's also on the verge as well from developed countries in terms of minerals that are found in Zimbabwe. For example, we see that Zimbabwe is reaching lithium, coal, chrome, platinum, gold, and also there's actually a discovery of uranium in the Muzarabani district in Zimbabwe. You know, a radioactive material which is essential for nuclear power plants, and also we see now even the interest of other Western countries as well in a waste to energy project which is being implemented in Zimbabwe. I won't classify it as climate colonialism, but I'm just emphasizing on the point that there's so much interest that that the developing countries are making on the global south, and I think it leaves Zimbabwe as well to be vulnerable to such incidents. So we see that climate colonialism is something that is making people to desert their own lands, and this is something that results in violence, you know, in conflicts, and yeah, and at the same time environmental degradation, because you know you're moving people who have learned how to mitigate climate change using their traditional practices, and then you're making them to shift, and then these new settlers, they're likely to misuse the environment and resulting in land degradation. So climate colonialism really it's something that I think the Western countries should as a result, you know, intervene and be committed upon some of the agreements that they would have made at these international conferences in terms of aiding the global south, on their mitigation they are carrying out. And also, not only are we talking about global south, we also see that even the poor communities, they are affected as well, because even in the global south, those who are poor, they are affected, because whenever these occurrences occurs, we see that those who are poor, they are affected because they are unable to defend themselves in such incidents. So much effort needs to be put in place to ensure that, you know, that climate resiliency, it's facilitated. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for the good answers and the comprehensive one. Yeah, that is catastrophe. I mean, about colonialism causing terrible consequences, and people all the time have to face it. It is really sorry. And Eva, you know, in Europe there are many activists. At least in Germany, there are many activists interested to show solidarity with you and your people there. You are doing quite a lot there. How we can support, how we can be in touch and support each other, I mean, and how we as European residents support you there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mohsen. So I think the international community, the climate activists should play a collective role, a collaborative role, to also include the perspective of global south, you know, so that they also tell the world from their own perspective on climate change, and also to include those that are affected by climate change, to be in a position as well to talk from their own perspective, and to be included within, decision making. And how we could stay connected, I think this is something that more platforms should be created, so that people from different backgrounds, global south, global north, get to meet, and they get to tackle this climate change. So some of these platforms could involve, online workshops, just like what we're doing. I think this is something that is really helpful, and I do encourage people to join Refugee for Future dialogue, to ensure that we bring about solution that is more sustainable. The international community could do would be to help in funding different projects that refugee youth who are tackling climate change, because I think this is something this is something that climate activists here in Africa they are lacking, and they lack sustainable funding, and I think this is something that climate activists, the international community should really work towards, to better the livelihoods, as well as encourage them to keep working towards mitigation of and adaptation of climate change. And also the other would be to join hands. I think we should all join hands. Climate activists should join hands in advocating towards the ending of the use of coal, the use of oil, because I think these are the primary reason that is polluting the atmosphere. And
thank you. Sorry.
Western countries should really, yes. Okay, I was saying, and then Western countries should really work towards keeping their promises of aiding countries in the global south, to be able to overcome, climate change. So I think partnerships, funding is really necessary and crucial to ensure that we all fight towards the impacts of climate change, which is a global crisis.
Thank you very much, Eva. Eva, we have 6 minutes left and one question. What message would you like to give to our audience?
Okay, so the message that I would like to give to every audience is to really take a part in mitigating climate change. Let us keep advocating on this issue because it's very crucial, and let us join others as well. I think this is something that we cannot do it individually, but it's something that we should collectively come together, join platforms such as Refugee for Future and other platforms, encouraging each other on practices that foster a climate resilient future, because climate change is stating. And so I think in terms of international organizations, I think they ought to act fast as well in different issues that we have mentioned to ensure that whenever such occurrences occurs, people are preserved, because this is something that will destroy, not only does it destroy shelter, destroys people's life, it results in more displacement of people, causing the loss of culture, people's culture, their loss, and causing indigenous people to desert their own lands. So let us act collectively to ensure that we reach a a sustainable, climate resilient future.
Hopefully. Eva, thank you very much to take our invitation and being our first online workshop guest. Eva is a refugee and climate activist. He himself is a refugee in Zimbabwe, and he's really active in refugee rights and climate activism. And I really appreciate you to joining us. And for this workshop, I thank you again. And it was a really good time talking to you. Thanks a billion. And any last word? Anything to add? Do you think there is a question that I didn't ask you, or anything you want to add?
No, just to say thank you. Thank you. I mean, so honestly, it's my first this opportunity. I mean, this is something that it really motivates, you know, to a person like me, it motivates me to also move ahead and to grow. I don't have expertise, but it's really opening, yeah, I mean, opening more opportunities for me. And thank you so much. I mean, getting my voice to be heard, and the voice of me talking about refugee, it's something that,
yeah,
it's something that is really crucial. And
we are happy about it. And this is actually the purpose. We want to motivate and connect activists all around the world to fight together against climate crisis. You know, climate change knows no border, so we have to fight all together. And yeah, our next workshop, online workshop, will be with Fridays for Future Pakistan. We will have an activist from Pakistan. We will talk about the current situation in Pakistan, and yeah, we will know more about this natural disaster happening in Pakistan. Thank you, Eva. Thanks for being our first guest, and I wish you a good day.